here he is.
Hi, Mandla. How are you?
Hi.
Hi.
How are you guys? Can you hear me?
Very well, very well.
Oh, good. How's it? How are you all?
We're
Good.
good. We're safe, it seems.
Healthy.
That's good. That's important.
The first question I had for all of you is, I know we're all based in different places. We're all taking shelter somewhere different. So I wanted to understand how, this COVID-19 impacted where you are, and how, what are, the current situation where you are. So maybe we'll start with Mandla and Joburg, and you tell us how things are when the lockdown started, if there's any ban of traveling, anything like that.
Sure.
About.
Okay. Thank you so much, Touria, for having us today. I think it's really wonderful to join forces with colleagues outside of Johannesburg, for once, from Lagos to Paris, and then yourself, who's, I guess, London, New York, and Morocco. For us, it's been quite a big change in South Africa ever since lockdown. We are going through what the government has come to call terms in terms of stages. Sorry, so there has been an announcement that we'll move to stage 4. Basically, there's been restricted movement of people. There's definitely no flights. We are still at home. I think 20% of the workforce has started to go back into offices. Stage 5 was obviously all the essential sort of stuff. So we're now moving into stage 4. So we've been at stage 5. I think, it's been a very tough period in South Africa, I think, especially from an art industry. I guess all sectors are affected. This is the one virus where we're all affected: the poor, the rich, the wealthy, everybody, black, white, you name it all. So it's been quite humbling that we all stuck at home and trying from here going forward.
So in terms of the peak, because everybody talks about a peak, so you reach your peak, or like, is there a peak coming up in terms of the virus?
That's a brilliant question. South Africa basically tried to contain the virus. So we've been under lockdown. The numbers have only been going up recently. So when, for us, we'd always thought that September would be the perfect date to have the art fair, because that was already set. We thought that it will all be coming down, but it looks like for South Africa, the peak is actually going to be much later in the year. So the numbers started at less than 10 people, and now we're sitting at 17,000 people, I think, today. So they've been going up by 1,005 a day. So our peak is still coming later in the year. So I just don't know how the situation will be contained.
But we all affected by this, and I'm like following, the Johannesburg situation, the South African situation, as close as I'm following the London situation. We have a lot of artwork galleries participating from, South Africa, usually for London. So for us, it's as important to understand, the situation of all the countries, on the continent than it is, outside the continent.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, because I think what's happening, especially a fair like yours, where you do get your galleries that come from the continent, all of us are going to come out of this in different stages. That's the scary part, is that when South Africa makes it out of the coronavirus, maybe Nigeria might not be ready, maybe Cameroon might not be ready. So that's the challenge that, or maybe Nigeria will be ahead of South Africa. You never know. So the continent is going, which is my challenge as well from where I sit, because we have South African galleries, which are pretty much dominant as industry players here in this part of the world, and I guess have been flying the flag for quite a long time. For South Africa, for African artists. So with them being so heavily affected, it has such an impact in the way that they will participate in anything going forward internationally.
And how about you, Tokini? Is it the same situation in Lagos, or you closed earlier or later, or is there a peak coming up at the same time? Or what is the situation for you in Lagos?
So in Lagos, we were initially locked down around about late March. And about 2 weeks ago, the lockdown has been eased. But it's what the government is calling an intelligent lockdown, meaning that because of the high population density that you have in Lagos, it was very difficult for the government to insist and persist with a total shutdown because you had large masses within the population who were very badly affected by that. Now we have a situation where critical businesses are open. And so businesses where they're not able to work remotely from home, they are open and functioning. Lagos has about 2,500 cases at the moment, and Nigeria has about 6,000 cases. What we've seen thus far is that a lot of business owners are still choosing to have their offices operate working remotely from home, but then essential businesses are moving about. And the government, especially within Lagos, is taking quite a responsible approach to this and taking it very seriously and actually listening to the concerns of the various members of society, which has been really encouraging for us. With the art scene, sadly, there are no art shows. Galleries are unable to open at this time. It has been quite a trying time, I would say, for the art industry here. You know, we work in a city that has its peak periods, you know, so if you come to Lagos around the time of Artex Lagos, there's a lot that's happening in terms of the art scene. And where we are right now, April, May is actually usually very active with lots of galleries, shows and openings, especially in the build up to the rainy season. So what we're seeing is the galleries are in quite a difficult position, but we are hopeful with regards to the question you asked about the peak. We're not entirely sure when the peak will come. We don't believe we have hit the peak thus far, but the expectation within the city is that round about September, October, November, events can start to happen again gradually and slowly, but we are still not 100% sure. So a lot of the events that were positioned happen around about April, move Q3, Q4, and we're hoping to see some movement round about that time.
That's good. I mean, we both with Victoria from, I mean, at least our events are based in Europe. I'm usually, you know, based in London. I was able to flee to south of France, but not to Morocco, where I'm from, because they cut all the traveling, you know, coming in and coming out from Morocco. So I couldn't, you know, take shelter there for when I was ready to go from London. But I mean, the good news from London before I go to Victoria is that the galleries are due to open on the 1st of June. The museum for the moment are due to open on the 1st of July. And most of the fair in October are still as planned to happen in October. Obviously, you know, it will definitely be affected by, you know, for example, Freeze, I'm sure will be affected by, you know, who can come from the US, for example, or who can come from Asia. But they are planning the show, probably a smaller show, I can imagine, even for us, you know, than with the galleries who can participate it, not can participate it. But how in Paris, because how is the situation in Paris, knowing that I've talked to one gallery who said that they might be able to do one-on-one appointments and things like that already this week?
Yeah, well, you know, in Paris, we've reached our peak, and we've been coming down from it, and it's very encouraging because every night on the news they announce less and less cases, deaths, and hospitalizations. So that's always encouraging, and though we've lived through a pretty strict lockdown for about 2 months, that happened from one minute to another. We've started to deconfine, as we say, on May 11th, so a couple of weeks ago. I think that the state of mind here too is that yes, life is picking up again. Businesses are opening again. Not all of them. Restaurants, cafes, cinemas, theaters, museums remain closed, but a lot of businesses have been able to resume their activity, galleries included. But we can't just pick up where we left off. I think there is that state of mind that realizes that our attitude has to change, because today, yes, we've reached our peak, and yes, we're easing down lockdown, but the virus is still here, and it's still among us, and we're still coexisting with it until the world finds a solution, a vaccine or a treatment for it. So how do we resume our activities? How do we resume life while coexisting with this virus? And mostly being careful that it doesn't overtake again, because I think the one thing that everybody fears is a lockdown again, which would be economically very dramatic. So it's this there is this real, I think, energy and positive thinking in how do we change the way we handle our businesses. And I'm talking about something that's very general, not just applied to the art world, but to everyone, in terms of client and business relationships. Do we work from home? Do we do one-on-one appointments like you were talking about? What of gallery openings? What of communication, et cetera, et cetera? And I know all these things we're going to talk about in the following questions, but there is this effort, I think, to redefine the way we work, that is challenged by exactly what Tokini was talking about, this lack of visibility of what the coming months are going to bring, and that's very difficult, I think, for many.
But what is very interesting is, like, we all at the same time, in a way, coming this fall, and I'm sure that everybody attending here knows very quite well our different fairs, but I know that Mandla, normally you set up for September, I'm set up for October, Tokini, I think you're next in November, early November, and then you have Victoria also in November. What is, do you think, your midterm or short-term, changes going on? So I know that, for instance, for us, we had to postpone New York, which was supposed to take place in May, and go digital, trying to do an online preview in a very short amount of time. But Mandla, do you have like a second scenario or second plans or second dates, for your September organization? Because I would say that this is quite coming fast, for you, and then we are coming as well very soon. But I think you're the one who will have to make a decision the earliest.
Sure. It's been quite interesting to see the cycle of how this virus has affected the world. When people think that things will start to activate, things don't actually happen in that way. So it's been very fascinating for me to watch. And when we immediately went South Africa, well, I guess when we started hearing that the Hong Kong scene was starting to be affected, which is the early part of the art scene anyway, I then thought, oh, well, we'll probably be fine because we're much later in the year. But guess what? We're now affected. So at this stage, it has been a lot of backwards and forth in terms of looking at option two being that we move the dates. So for me, it's been really paying attention to sort of the tourism industry in South Africa. As most of you know, tourism is quite an important sector in South Africa.
But that might be affected as well, right? Because
huge. It has basically come to a standstill. So basically, I don't know where the government's going, where this country is going to find a way of reviving the sector. Just like Italians have been affected, as predominantly their economy is tourism. South Africa has a big tourism industry. So for me, this time around, I've looked for direction in the tourism industry, because all the hotels are shut down in South Africa at this stage. No flights can leave. Domestic flights have been stopped. And there's been different stages in terms of what can be done, what cannot be done. In fact, when you walk into the grocery stores, not all the departments in the stores have been opened. Just certain sections are opened. The baby section is essential. So there've been all these different categorization, and also it's become quite political, with South Africans kind of fighting over what rights do they have at the moment. With this level 4 where we are, we can't even jog on the street. So you're only allowed to jog between 5 o'clock and 9 o'clock. You can cycle, you can run between those times, and that's it. After that, you're not allowed to be on the street. So it's been quite strict in South Africa, to say. And so for us, we've looked at changing dates. But the biggest, I think one thing is to look at a postponement. But just looking at the peak. But when I look
for 2020 or 2021.
The ideal situation would still to have the fair if our peak gets underway at some point in August or September. Then we could be opening up the industry because that's really our summertime. So South Africans typically switch off mid-December to start to go to their holiday homes. So I think, or just to take holidays, companies shut down. So I don't know what it's going to be like in South Africa because the economy is going to be really impacted. A lot of small businesses are starting to suffer. Big businesses are also in South Africa being affected. One of the big retailers, Edgar's, is also suffering at this stage. And so I think what we'll do is there are a couple of options. One is we definitely going to explore the online platform. I support it. I think it's a form of a bridge at this stage, but it's obviously not like a physical art fair. So for us, we're about physicality. So we will still get there. So I think we're going to watch the situation very closely as the tourism industry lifts its stages, or we get to stage one, maybe in August or September, then we will know if we can actually have public gatherings. But at this point, we're not allowed to basically have a public gathering between all the stages. So that's the most important thing to know.
And how about you, Tokini? Is it like already too early, or are you still like considering also plan Bs and, you know, Cs and etc. with the dates of the fair? I know that for 154, we even like are considering, you know, locally more of an art fair, you know, with galleries who are able to travel and who are, you know, not in this banning traveling locality, but the artworks still have to come from somewhere, so we might be impacted. But so we are thinking already in October might have to change the way we are thinking our organization. But is it too early? Because November is like, it seems quite far, like you have one more month, you know, to think about it.
I think
it seems like forever, but honestly it isn't. You know, by now we have usually started so much in the course of our year. For now, in the medium term, we are still very much looking towards the fair first weekend in November. We're planning towards it. And we are hopeful that we will be able to have it, but the emphasis is on the word hopeful. So we are maintaining contact with the Lagos state authorities because they are being very responsive to the concerns of businesses. I think Lagos is quite keen to show that there is resilience in the city. Lagos is also, I think, very keen to support ventures like ours that have been very good for the city thus far over the 4.5 years that we've been running. So we hope to have the fair, but our first priority, of course, is everyone's safety and health. So what we will be looking to do is ensure that we're fully compliant with safety measures, which means that when the government determines the number of people that can be in a room at a time, we will be adjusting access to the fair on that basis. I have to add as well that with regards to our fair, I mean, Touria, you've been a couple of years ago, you would have seen that the Lagos and Nigerian contingent in terms of the audience at our fair is very large. We do have large numbers of international guests that come. I mean, the Tate came with about 30 guests last year, but we have a very strong support base locally. And we feel it's important as well that by November, there will be a desire and a hunger for the kind of uplifting experience that Artex Lagos provides. When it comes to international travel, we will be hopeful about what happens with the airports, but we can't say 100%. And so to connect with our international audiences, as Mandla was saying, digital becomes very important. And we are starting to develop the measures that we will put in place for digital connectivity for our fair and for our platform, while still maintaining the responsibility that we feel to local audiences to give them the same vibrant and exciting dynamic experience that they've come to associate with Artex Lagos each year.
Yes, I'm sure the social, will be missed, and it's probably what is the most missed, right now, being all on lockdown. But I wanted to come back to Victoria, who has the most experience in facing crisis than we all do. I mean, you've been resilient and being able to face, some crazy postponement in your past. Like, do you think, you have a plan B already? Or you still, set on your dates for the moment? And are you thinking, more of a local collector base, more local galleries, for first, for this particular 2020 AKAA, basically, or is it going to be?
Yes to all of your questions. We do have experience with canceling and postponing. That's for sure. I think that the way we think about it is kind of in line with everybody. Today, November is far enough that we won't make rash decisions on canceling or postponing. But in this context, and having learned from previous experience, we cannot not think of a plan B and a plan C and a plan D, for that matter. And we have to explore every single option, because we are in a situation where, of course, we are subject to national and international measures that will be taken over the next months, which we have no visibility on. But beyond that, the safety and security, health-wise, of everybody involved is the primary concern. But beyond that, there is also the question of the economic health of everybody involved. And at this point, we've all said it, and Mandla has underlined it in South Africa, but businesses are suffering, galleries are suffering, big and small, and that is something to take into consideration in terms of economics. So it's more important than ever today for us to communicate with one another, to communicate with galleries, with collectors, with institutions, to find the solutions that allow us to overcome not only the measures in place that block us from traveling, from being physically present somewhere, but also that allow us to overcome the psychology of everything, the fear that surrounds this situation, which I think cannot be underestimated.
Well, which takes me to my next questions. I mean, with my discussion with some of the galleries, for 154, for example, London, we usually are very strict with the application, like most of you, where they have to apply in February, we give their answer in March, and obviously they have to commit already in March. But after what happened to us in New York, we obviously moved around all those deadlines because we needed to have more visibility on what was happening. But what we can feel as 154 right now, we have a few galleries who are very committed and excited to go back to normal, trying to get back to their activities, etc. There's obviously some who are suffering a lot. I think everybody's suffering, but there's some that don't know if they will make it, in a few weeks or in a few months, and they're not automatically coming from the continent. We have galleries from the US, from Europe, that are considering themselves as small business and are actually not knowing what they'll be able to do in a couple of months if the sales stays at as a standstill as they are right now. And we have others who, are just more willing to wait a bit more to understand the ban of traveling in their country, if the shipping is going to be possible, So I was wondering if you had a chance to get some inputs from your galleries. And maybe Victoria, you mentioned already, that you had a bit of discussions, and is the enthusiasm of some galleries and is there still, or you feel that they are a bit more sensitive about committing to a fair?
I don't, from what I take, there's no global consensus. There's no one way to think. I think that because each gallery, each business is confronted to their very own set of difficulties to overcome, then it automatically impacts the way they envision the future. And I think that for many of them, perhaps what is global is the lack of ability to make a decision towards the fall calendar. So that's why I think it's a constant conversation and brainstorm with them. I think that there is on the one hand the necessity in terms of economics to reduce risk as much as possible. You were talking about deadlines and about applications, and of course we cannot expect a gallery today to confirm and pay up a booth for an event in September, in November, without having any idea of what the situation is going to be like. So we have to adapt to this sort of situation, and that can only be done through communication. Yeah. And then, you know, there's also the idea, the subject of mobility, which is a huge one for all of us. How do international galleries, close or far, get to one another when we don't know when the borders will open again? How will the transporter prices will be affected by this whole situation? What are going to be customs rules from now on? And all of these questions are deeply important in making those decisions. But there is also the drive to not just, you know, go home, shut down, and not do anything about it. And I think that's really important as well. We actors of the art world can't just expect the art world to fall apart. We have to continue carrying it together. And I know you wanted to discuss particularly the young market of contemporary African art. A lot has been achieved in the past years and the past decade, and it is more important than ever now for us to keep on carrying the development of it. So I think it's really important for us to find the solutions that enable us in a very near, not so near, and distant future to keep working towards the development of this market and the promotion of these artists that we also fervently believe in.
And Tokini, I mean, talking to having been to Artex Lagos a couple of years ago, and understanding also that your local gallery participation is quite important as well. Would you consider doing a very local Nigerian gallery based if the barriers are not open, and having a more, like, I guess, regional fair based on the idea of doing something, you know, to support the ecosystem, but without maybe being as big as you were before, but rather reshaping or rethinking your fair just to adapt to the situation in November?
So the truth is that we have been rethinking everything on all dimensions. As Victoria said, there's a plan A, B, C, E, F, G. We have so many iterations of this because certainty is the one thing that we all do not have at the moment. Now, with regards to galleries, we have been in conversation with our galleries. We've been speaking to them. And I think they have actually really appreciated the patient approach that we have taken, whereby we're saying, we're in this with you. So we're going to keep kind of waiting and watching and seeing what's happening, both globally, but also locally in Nigeria. And we're just going to stay in constant contact. So similarly, we're not putting pressure on galleries at this point in time. And we are working to ensure that the solution we come up with is best for galleries, given the situation that they've had throughout the course of the year. I think it's very important for us as art fair directors to really think about the considerable difficulty that a lot of galleries have had over the past few months. And what we are trying to do at Artex Lagos is see where can we alleviate some of that pain, where can we alleviate some of that discomfort. Now, you asked about, there was something you asked about, but I've actually kind of lost my...
No, but there's another question on this. So, I mean,
you asked about domestic galleries, right? And whether we would consider having a domestic iteration solely. The truth is we're open to all options. We do have a strong local base of galleries that work with the fair. We are in contact with them, and we know that they are literally eager to do something and to show the strength of the art sector and the art market in Nigeria. So if that is what it comes to, then we will do that. But for us, the focus is on the fact that there should be something this year. We must show that resilience within the art market and art sector, because as Victoria said, we've been working very hard to build that momentum over the last few years.
Yeah. No, but this was my feeling, but also for Mandla, you know, in Joburg, you have some of the strongest galleries, you know, locally, and maybe, you know, depending on which phase you are, you might be in a phase where maybe you're still banned to travel, but, you know, holding a fair in South Africa with the South African contenders is already, you know, a good thing, you know, for the market and for the support of the ecosystem for this particular period, and to support the sales. That's you know, I mean, this is one of the thought. I mean, I have the same thought for London, by the way, just like thinking if there was only the London galleries participating, or London and France, you know, who is able to do it, you know, what would be the collector base, you know, what would the fair look like, you know, with social distancing, you know, and, you know, having just a regional local art fair with less people participating in it. What are your thoughts on this, Mandla?
Sure. First and foremost, without a doubt, the galleries are affected. I guess if you look at their participation around the world, from South Africa in particular, they really have made it into the big fairs in the world. They participate at Art Basel for many years, some of them, and Freeze. And many international art fairs, like a gallery like SMAC in Cape Town participates in more than 13 art fairs around the world. So you can only imagine, as a small business, how active they are. So the big thing is going to be financial. I think a lot of them having closed down even for a week, it's just long. And closed for 2 months is way too long. And as we look at the stages, as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, South Africa is going through its stages. The next stage still doesn't allow, I think, pretty much for people to walk into galleries and view art and buy art. So we're looking at that at level 1, which is most likely later in the part of the year. So the question is, how are galleries going to survive? So a lot of them have kind of taken the position of doing set up very quickly online viewing platforms. I'm sure some of you guys will have seen some of them, as well as being more active. I mean, an artist like Tenjiwe Ngosi was going to open up for the first, actually have a first solo show in South Africa. And then on the eve of this, I think it was the night before lockdown, and she was not able to have people come to the galleries, but nevertheless did manage to make sales. And so it's been really great from that perspective. But for me, it's my worry really is around the work that we've been doing here on this part of the world, because I do think that an Africa that is weak from a buying perspective, an Africa that is weak from a collecting perspective, is not a good one. It's not a good one for the future. We've seen across all the different industries the issues that each sectors have faced on the continent. So for me, it's been quite devastating to see the amount of progress that has been made by such a small group of, I guess, galleries to just fly this flag at all costs for the African market, and now suddenly having to stop for a moment. So I think a big thing is going to be, I guess it's about balance. It's about, can you, is the local market enough to sustain these businesses? Given that they have now gone international, some of them, they do participate all over the world. So yeah, I've been quite active myself working with some of the galleries to find solutions, because it's really not about them attending the fair. I'm part of the ecosystem. All of us as directors plug into this ecosystem some way or the other in terms of the marketplace. So being actively talking to government around trying, in fact, in South Africa, you can't ship art at this point because it's not an essential services. So can you imagine the restrictions that some of them might have picked up sales from around the world that cannot get the work out of the country at this stage? So those are some of the challenges that face. So obviously, you know, I think we're all adjusting, but a big thing has been we will still find a way of having an art fair at some point when we've been given the green light by government to saying that we have survived this virus. But at this stage, everyone has been really around. As one of the initiatives that we did as Art Joburg was to actually quickly go and film all the exhibitions across some of the major galleries in South Africa very quickly. It was a lot of time constraint and pressure, but for the last 6-7 weeks that we've been under lockdown, every week we have taken our viewers or anybody who's interested in this part of the world to go and see the exhibitions that were actually planned for. So you can imagine quite a lot of resources, quite a lot of money went into preparing for these exhibitions, and the next thing it was like, okay, it's all stopped.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, with New York and with 154 going with a partnership with Artsy to go on online preview, the good news is that this whole increase in the digital, you know, strategies and like development of platforms is also helping the sales. So I know that from what I see, I'm not really sure, but what I see, we don't have yet the whole feedback of the galleries, is that they still manage to do quite good sales, you know, online with 154 New York. So I think, you know, we've seen museums, institutions, you know, galleries doing their own platforms, you know, to try to be more active on the digital world, you know, and I think this is a good, you know, solution, at least an adaptation, a solution that can adapt to the crisis. One thing that I think we can all do is definitely, you know, support, you know, by giving more visibility online one way or the other, creating our own partnering with digital partners, you know, to be able to support the sales of those galleries. But I think, you know, somebody reminded me from the galleries 2 days ago that I had a discussion with, saying that when you're based on the continent, you know, you obviously have the fairs to sell internationally. A lot of your collectors are already based internationally. So they do a lot of, you know, PDF selling, you know, sending emails already. And they were saying that, of course, you know, the local market is important, but for some of them, you know, 75% of their sales are, you know, sent by PDF, exchanging with their collectors and their by email. So it's not online, but it's already, you know, something where people are not going to a physical space, but rather, you know, trusting the gallery, trusting the work. And it's true that there might be conversation where you have now interesting conversation with your collectors saying, you know what, this is amazing new set of work, but it will take a bit longer to send you the work if you buy it, because there's obviously a ban on sending the work. I think that this they will definitely understand, because they live it, you know, they live it themselves. But you're right. But I think, you know, I mean, if you're selling from artists that are based in the same region or the same country, you're definitely in a better shape in terms of just explaining the shipping, the new shipping rules, you know, that might take 6 months to receive your piece. And that might be completely fine with the collector.
Yeah.
So any particular digital platform already in the pipelines for you, Mandla, for September? Like, do you have your own platform? Are you partnering with any digital partners for September?
Yeah, we're looking at a number of options, definitely. I think it will be important that we find a way. I mean, these times are about try and survive, try come with solutions. So any sale that can go through is an important sale. So we're going to find a way of getting the local base to support, but also all the friends, the people who follow these artists from the continent to continue to support. I think the big thing, I've not been seeing a lot of from a national perspective, like in South Africa, like there's been a lot of relief grants that look at different sectors, which funny enough, so the small business sector has some sort of a grant. So the government has been really amazing in terms of coming up with solutions. But when it comes to understanding the art industry, I think it's quite misunderstood. So as a result, I think this part of the sector is going to fall behind in terms of getting the support. So we do rely heavily on those that do buy art. So for us, we definitely going to create some sort of an online platform. We just don't know which one we're going to use. We've just been looking at different trends, and I think everyone is learning. When I looked at the Art Basel platform, which was the first one,
yes.
And then I've seen now what Freeze has done and what you have done yourself by using the Artsy platform. But I've also been encouraged to read that from an American perspective, there's been quite a rise in terms of sort of young collectors buying new work or just completely a new audience. I think there's quite a big figure of new people who have never bought work have started to buy using this digital platform. So it's quite encouraging. For us in South Africa, we've been quite, I guess our level of activity when it comes to online sales has been less, using e-commerce has been less than 10%. For a long time, as someone who was heavily invested in the e-commerce sector before coming into the art industry, it's been quite interesting to see how South Africans have been forced to use this online platform and to sort of start buying food online. So in fact, some of the sites have crashed in South Africa. So I've always said that if people go to e-commerce, whichever way they go, it's a good thing for South Africans to learn how to use the e-commerce platform. So there's been quite a big jump. I think we might be sitting at more than 30% users when it was always less than 10% when you think that people should be using online. So I do think that people really embrace it. It is a bridge. I believe that the art world can't rely only on digital platforms, but I think it's an opportunity that we need to embrace in order to make sure that sales do happen. The big thing for me is around how do we make sure that these galleries stand, because you and I, all of us, cannot have art fairs if galleries start to close down.
Of course, of course.
Challenge.
The good news on the digital though is that from the small feedback we got from Artsy on our preview, you know, for the first day of our VIP preview, it seems we got more inquiry and page review than what we had last year for the whole duration of the fair, 3 times the amount. So people are really online trying to discover, buy, I don't know yet, you know, the full aspect of things, but in terms of physically being online, looking, discovering, it's something that they actually do. But to move on to Tokini, and my next question, and this is a question that came about because I've been I did 1 or 2 webinars, but also in an interview where people seem to worry more about what we do, you know, in terms of the impact of this crisis on this young, just discovered, you know, artists from the continent, and our market seems so fragile that they worry a lot about if we're going to survive this or not. So I wanted to know your opinion, Tokini. Do you think there's actually something that we have to officially worry about our visibility and our market more than the impact that, you know, this COVID-19 has on every part of the world in the art community?
So that is, I think that's the question a lot of us are asking at the moment. Do we have something to worry about, especially considering the momentum that we've been able to generate thus far in recent years for the African art market? I think that, to be honest, to ensure that that momentum sustains, we've got to actually take quite a bullish approach, which means seeking out the opportunities wherever they may be. I've been really encouraged to see what galleries are doing, especially within the African art market, how they're embracing digital and trying to connect with collectors, whether it's internationally, on the continent, etc. And I think we've got to ensure that we push. Now, if you think about, I think with the sector, I know there's a tendency to really fixate on the market, and also you can say there that with the relatively accessible pricing level within the African art market, you could say that at this time, when collectors may be looking for that, maybe looking for works that can be easier to approach and works that can be easier to collect, especially if you're thinking young collectors who are embracing digital. But I do want to also talk about the artists. I mean, I think all of us here know that the vast majority of the artists on the continent are not represented exclusively by galleries. And one of the things I think that's so important to sustain that momentum is thinking through how these artists who are currently deprived of gallery shows, currently deprived of fairs, how they are going to be able to sustain their practices as well. And when you think about, so we have, for example, at Artex, a prize for the Access Bank Artex Prize focusing on young talent. But I really would love to see so many of us within the space. I know, Touria, you've launched some amazing initiatives for young talent, and I've seen this across the art fairs thus far. I do think that it is essential that as the fairs, it would be amazing if we start to think about the ways in which we can help this ecosystem holistically.
Yeah, so this is one of my last questions, and I will go with Victoria on this one. But what can we do to sustain this, this market, and what do you think in terms of collaboration? You know, we could support from an artist to a gallery to obviously anybody involved with our ecosystem. Do you have any, collaborative ideas that we can all maybe brainstorm about, that we can also apply, for the future? In my case, just imagining, what would be an October without a fair, for example, I still wanted to sustain the galleries, that have been working with us one way or the other. And I mean, I was wondering if, helping them share space, from the continent to London, because some of them might not have galleries anymore, or, trying to do a parcours, in London, of the galleries who might have a program, or artists, collective of artists who would like to show and try to bring our people, to the different spaces that could host exhibitions, while we might not be able to host a fair, or like to actually support, our gallery system on the ground, and make sure that they still have maybe an art week, even if we're not physically there with the fair. Do you have any similar idea, or this is things you think about in terms of collaboration initiative?
Well, to start answering this question, I'm going to bounce back on what Tokini has just been saying, and because it's important to reassure on this young African art market and its stability or lack thereof because of an international worldwide health crisis. Yes, it'll be difficult. Yes, we're going to have to readjust, find solutions, be innovative, but that's a silver lining. And innovation is what we do, create is what we do. And if you look at each of us in terms of fair directors and the fairs that we have, or the events that we have created in the past decade, we've gone well beyond just selling square meters to galleries. We've come up with cultural programs. We come up with opportunities for dialogue, meetings between artists, curators, the public, collectors, amateurs. We've facilitated spaces for the art world to discover artists that they did not know about, to look at this really rich and vibrant art scenes from the African continent and beyond. So let's put all of this work to good use and into motion. And today is the first time that we are all chatting together face to face, digitally.
And so many questions that we might have to do it again, because we might not be able to answer all those questions.
I think this is just the start, and I'm game. I'm in to brainstorm with you about how we can join strengths to put together all this creativity and all of this work that we know we can do. On the digital front, absolutely. What are the digital solutions so that we may give more visibility, we may give better communication access to artists, galleries, and all the other art professionals that are involved in this industry. The question of mobility, transportation, art transport. Today, the borders are closed, so that's one issue. But what about tomorrow? What about 2021? How do galleries work alongside with us to facilitate art transportation in a world where travel altogether is going to be a real question and is going to be rethought by everyone? Cultural programs. We all have very strong talk platforms, forums. How do we better work together so that these cultural platforms cross roads, and so that the dialogue is richer and even more powerful than it is right now? I don't have the concrete solutions to all of these questions right this minute, especially because we're all still in this crisis mode. But when we come out of it, and before we even come out of it, and that's what we've started doing today, let's open up the dialogue so that we can just be stronger, and we can just come out of this stronger, because all of the work that's been done in the past years is not about to vanish. On the contrary, I think that it's going to show what resilience we all have to surpass these type of world events, which, today it's COVID. We don't know what is going to be next. I'm well placed to know that catastrophes do happen, but it's part of the game, I guess, when you're in event planning and cultural promotion. And so how do you work around them to come out stronger? And I believe that we're all creative enough to find the solutions.
Yeah, so I mean, let's promise each other that maybe we do another talk in 1 month or two and share more ideas on the different topics, because I think we will all have evaluated a couple of strategies and things, and might be at different level of thoughts on this. But let's take a few questions, so we are able to answer a few questions from the audience. So this question was sent by Ketiwe McLean. It says, smaller and unknown artists are going to struggle to survive during and immediately post the COVID-19 pandemic, because online buyers will prefer to buy from artists that are well known. Where will the smaller and lesser known artists find shelter? So that's a good question. This is, I mean, I can answer for 154 here, because one of my ideas, and to be honest, I'm happy that everybody takes it on, because I think it will be a very good collaboration idea, is that if we are able to develop our own platform, is definitely, expand our reach to artists directly. And maybe have a curated space where we could, support artists and maybe younger galleries, or galleries who might not be able to physically come to the fair. This platform will exist, to complete what we're doing. And I think it would be an amazing idea to be able to support younger artists who might not have galleries yet. And but it all depends, obviously, on some kind of, like, I wouldn't say selection, but understanding who will support. So we'll definitely have to do some kind of application system, to make sure that we know what's out there and what to respond. I know, Tokini, you have already initiative like this, at the fair. So maybe you can answer to that question with what you do already.
Sure. So, I mean, even since we launched the fair in 2016, we have had the Artex Prize, which is now sponsored by Access Bank. And we launched this even from day one, because in our market and in our environment, young and emerging artists have very, very few supporting structures. In fact, in some cases, it's nil. And so we feel as a fair that our our responsibility is to the ecosystem. As responsibility to the market and to develop it, yes, but also to think about the ecosystem. And so right now we run an annual prize for the best emerging artists in Nigeria. And what we're actually working on doing now is ensuring that our funnel gets bigger. So yes, there is one winner of the prize who gets to showcase at the fair and also does a 3-month residency at Gasworks in London. But before we get to that one winner, we're fixating on how many artists can we reach, how many artists can we impact, how many artists can we have mentorship opportunities for, and also connect to wider opportunities through our network in the market. It has worked for us quite well thus far. We've seen some of our winners go off to do residencies at places like Palais de Tokyo, which has been a real source of pride for us. But more importantly, we recognize that this generation of young artists that's coming out of the continent, and I can speak for Nigeria, they are the future for all of us, really. And so we've been really proud of the opportunity to be able to work with them at that early stage in their careers. And it's something we definitely hope to continue and expect to continue, even regardless of what may happen with the fair this year.
And I saw that on your social media that you have like also, I don't know if it's linked, but this review of work that you're launching, right?
We launched that this week, and we are looking into portfolio reviews for an even broader number of artists, because young artists are quite cut off from more experienced artists or gallery owners that could help to give them very real feedback about what they're doing. I mean, you all work with artists, and I'm sure you'll be amazed. You know all full well what happens with an artist when someone several steps ahead gives them the kind of feedback that can be quite transformational, actually. We've had over 100 artists already apply for this since we put it up just a day and a half ago, because there is such a hunger out there for experienced guidance. And we expect to be doing the reviews between a mix of our team and more established artists a couple of times a month, actually going into the foreseeable future.
So we have another question from Claude Grunitzky, which is a serial entrepreneur and editor-in-chief of True Africa. I think not a lot of people know him, and I know he's a good friend of Victoria too. So one of his questions is, could it be that social distancing forces art fair to hold smaller and more frequent events for select collectors around the world, might help to mitigate the risk linked to crowds in the big annual fair? So I'll let you, Victoria, answer to this one, since it's your friend and my friend too.
Hi, Claude. It's lovely to know that you're listening. I hope you're doing well. It's actually a really good question, and one that we've been thinking a lot about. If our fairs do take place, which we all hope, how do we deal with crowds? We've all had openings with so many people that we can barely turn around without bumping into someone. So how does that impact? I think that's it's important to remember that us as human beings have an amazing capacity to adapt. And 3 months ago, it was unthinkable that you would have to think about a meter distance to stand from someone else of every single person that crossed your path. Today, it's becoming a way of life. It's becoming a reality. So fairs and our publics are going to have to adapt as well. And I think that there are very many solutions to ensure that we adapt as well as we can. Furthermore, I think it's a wonderful opportunity, because how many times have we all heard, oh, there's so many people, I didn't see any of the artwork. Well, maybe this is the opportunity to focus on visitor experience and the experience of connecting to an artwork. Maybe we are going to rethink the way we handle our openings, our previews, our public openings, our visits, in order to offer an experience that's a lot more centered on the artwork and the connection between the artwork, and also the B2C connection between galleries and their visitors, rather than this mass crowding events that we all do love, obviously, but that are maybe just not possible anymore or for a certain time. So I'm actually, in terms of rethinking and reinventing ourselves, I think that's one of the more exciting parts. How, you know, okay, we can't be 20 people in a booth that's 10 square meters. Fine, let's be only 3 and make it really special, 43 at a time. And because of the context, everyone will play along. So it's up to us to find the good solutions to ensure that everybody has a wonderful experience in a safe environment.
So we are due to close this webinar, and we have unfortunately a couple of questions, but I think it might be a good idea to keep it to 1 hour because we all have other commitments. And but there's definitely some extremely good questions that we're not able to go through. So I mean, it's definitely something that we have to do again, just to be able to be fair to all the people that have sent all our questions. You don't understand how I'm happy to have hosted you today. This is, you know, something that I know you personally, indirectly or physically, we've met several times, but never had the chance to even chat like this and even like do a meeting or like try to regroup. So for me, it's been quite an honor to host this webinar, and I hope we'll have the opportunity to do more similar collaboration in the near future and share experiences. I mean, obviously, don't hesitate to contact if there's anything I can help you with this whole digital partnering, you know, events that we had to do for New York. And I really wish you the best of luck for the next couple of weeks with all the planning and the organization that we might be having to take on. But thank you again for coming and being part of this talk. Thank you for the attendees. And we'll obviously send the recording as soon as it's possible. Thank you guys for participating.
Thank you to you, Touria.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Nice to see you.
Good luck, everybody.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.